We're watching a critical hearing today in the Casey Anthony trial. What you're looking at right there are the attorneys at a sidebar with the judge. We cannot hear them at the moment, but as soon as they get back to some of the testimony that they're hearing from the FBI agent, Karen Korsberg-Lowe from Quantico, Virginia, we're going to take you back to that. Meanwhile, I want to bring in Keith, attorney, and he's been watching this case with us as well. Keith, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
So can you kind of bring us up to speed as just be joining us as to what you see happening so far this morning and why this hearing is so critical to the prosecution?
Well, there's very little evidence that directly connects Casey Anthony to the death of her daughter. There's no smoking gun in this case. There's nothing that puts her there at the scene dumping the body. So it seems like the state is putting in as much little bits of science, hoping in the aggregate that they will implicate Casey Anthony. With the hair banding, what's going on this morning is they have the expert from the FBI lab at Quantico who examined this one head hair that was taken out of the trunk that shows evidence of this post-mortem root banding. The reason this is significant is because this root banding only occurs in hairs that have been attached to a decomposing body. I think there's still some question as to what the biological mechanism is that causes this banding, but I think it's fairly well established in science that it only occurs in head hairs that are attached to a decomposing body. It doesn't always occur, but when it does in that fashion. They have the expert on, and right now they're going back and forth about a particular study that is about to be published. It's in the process of being peer-reviewed, but it hasn't been released yet. And the question is whether or not she's using that study as part of her testimony. The defense doesn't have a copy of it, and fair surprise. Everybody seems to be aware it exists, but the defense hasn't seen it, and the question is whether or not she should be allowed to testify concerning that.
So we've got Gene back. We're going to go to Gene in a second, but Keith, I just wanted to ask you too. So since it was kind of an unfair surprise to the defense, what is their option now?
Well, the judge said that he was going to allow this proceeding to go forward in general before this article, the specific article was brought up. When they opened court this morning, the defense objected to something concerning this proceeding going forward. The judge said he would allow the proceeding to go forward and reserve judgment till later. So what we have here is basically an expert giving what's known as an offer of proof. This is the same type of testimony she'd give on the stand at trial. So they're going through this whole thing, and then they're going to, determine whether or not this should be allowed.
Let's turn to criminal defense attorney Keith Murray. And by the way, he's a former FBI analyst. He has a background in forensics. Folks, look at this picture. This is an example of post-mortem root banding. And Keith, I'm wondering if we can step back just a second, and can you explain for us what is post-mortem root banding, just so all of us understand as we watch this testimony?
Sure. I think it's interesting to know off the top that you haven't heard any testimony today regarding what biological mechanism causes this.
Okay.
And I think there's still some uncertainty in the scientific community as to what that is. We do know that it only occurs in hair that is attached to a decomposing body. It doesn't always occur, but the only time it does occur is when it's a head hair attached to a decomposing human body.
Well, if that's the case, Keith, then what's the problem with allowing testimony of this sort to come in the case? And why hasn't it been allowed very often?
Because it's novel in Florida. It hasn't been tested in a great many courts in the nation, but it has been tested several times. There's a lot of peer review articles, and the defense just kind of tipped their hand as to how they're going to question her at trial, because they're saying that in the trunk there was also there was garbage that had sat in the trunk for 18 days in the impound lot after the car was impounded by the police, and that food has some of the enzymes in it that cause some discoloration of hair and some decompositional effects. And you could see how the defense was trying to get that in as causing some of this darkness, but Ms. Lowe, the defense witness there, the state witness there, was fairly adamant that she can distinguish between that and this post-mortem root banding.
Yeah, critical distinction right there. We're getting a look at what this trial might look like if this evidence comes in, if this witness testifies. And by the way, FBI agent Lowe said at one point that post-mortem root banding, it's indicative of decomposition, just as you said, Keith. Let's take a look at her testimony.